Welcome to 2819. This is the show where we aim to inspire you to go and make disciples of all nations. I'm Sandra Dimes.
And I'm Bryan Rohrenbacher, and this is the television outreach of Reasons to Believe, a viewer-supported ministry where science and faith converge.
And as you're watching the show, just check out reasons.org/2819. There you can go and support resources like this.
And for those of you watching on YouTube, make sure you hit that subscribe button below so you can keep up with all the new videos we're putting out.
And also be sure to connect with us on social media. We're at Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at 2819 Show.
And if you're tired of looking at me, you can get the podcast version on Apple Podcasts and Google Play. Just search Reasons to Believe Podcast.
Well, now we're going to start with a quick rundown of the show. We have a great show for you today. First up in our Nexus segment, we're going to have Brett Kunkle. We have a clip from our AMP conference where he discusses how we can learn how to ask questions before attempting to share our faith. Kind of a good thing to do, right?
Yeah, definitely. And in Culture Talk, Sandra will be talking with Jay Sherer about how can Christians authentically engage in geek culture. And this one's really important to me because everyone needs the gospel, especially geeks like me.
Yes. In our Give and Take, Jeff will talk with Fuzz and Ken Samples about Neanderthals and whether they painted cave art. And then also in RTB News, Bryan, you're going to be talking with Monica about our new program, RTB Speakers Bureau.
Yes, you'll want to stick around for that. It's an exciting new program. And in RTB 101, Ken Wolgemuth will answer the question, can we trust radiometric dating? Let's check that out.
Now it's time for RTB 101. This is the segment where we talk about practical questions to help equip you to share your faith with friends and family more effectively. And I'm here today with a very special guest, geologist and visiting scholar right now, Ken Wolgemuth. Welcome, Ken.
Thank you very much. I'm glad to be here.
We're just so glad to have you here and to talk about this very important topic. Can radiometric dating be trusted? And I have to tell you, Ken, I'm going to have true confession right now. When I first started working here 19 years ago, I did not know much about the science-faith conversation. But one thing I thought I knew was that you cannot trust these secular dating methods. So let's talk about it. Why should Christians trust radiometric dating?
Well, as I was reflecting on coming here and talking to you like this, I'm thinking, well, why do we trust clocks?
Okay.
So I put it in the same context. It's because thousands and thousands of clocks work and they work very well. It is also true that a variety of clocks don't work for whatever reason. And it may be the battery's dead, it could be the spring broke or whatever reason. So some don't work, but the vast majority do work. So that's sort of analogous to what happens in radiometric dating.
Okay, that's good. Now, if I were to go on Google and I just type in, can radiometric dating methods be trusted? There's going to be an innumerable amount of websites that are going to tell me why they cannot be trusted. And there seems to be so many examples where it doesn't seem like the results are consistent. How do I think about that?
Yeah. Well, the challenge, because of the nature of the way the church is divided over this issue, there are lots of websites that say they cannot be trusted. And as a geologist and geochemist, that's the area that specializes in radiometric dating. When I look at those, the vast majority of them are examples where it's a gross misapplication of the method. So it's basically false information being presented because they are not presenting the larger truth. They're only picking up the examples where it doesn't work.
Got it. So is it a little bit like trying to change the tire on my car with a screwdriver? Like that's not the right tool for the job. Is that part of the problem?
That's a good example. It's the wrong tool for the job.
Okay.
And the way my wife often likes to say it, and I think it's a pretty good analogy, when there are young volcanic rocks that have just come out of the ground, come out of the volcano, they cannot be dated correctly, suitably with potassium argon dating. So my wife puts it in the context. It is like using an oven thermometer to get the temperature of a baby to find out if the baby has a temperature.
Wrong tool for the job.
Wrong tool for the job.
Got it. Okay. Now, in the whole conversation about the age of the Earth, there's some people who say the Earth is some form of thousands of years old.
Yeah.
The conventional scientific age is that it's 13.7 billion years old. The Earth is roughly a little under 5 billion years old.
Yeah.
So the question is when I hear scientists talk about all of these ages, are they just guessing, or do they really know with some degree of certainty how these methods work and that they're reliable ages?
Yeah, we do test the evidence very carefully against known volcanic eruptions. One of the very best ones that I have to share is Mount Vesuvius. Mount Vesuvius erupted in 79 AD, and right about 1,920 years later, geologists and geochemists who were doing what's called the argon-argon method took some of that ash, multiple examples, took it into the laboratory, and they ended up with a argon-argon age of 1,925 years, plus or minus perhaps 90 years, because that's the uncertainty of the measurement. So there is a powerful, powerful example where it works extremely well. The age of the Earth is 4.6 billion years old, and that comes again from solid, credible looking at the evidence. In that case, it comes from the uranium element, uranium-238. And I had the privilege of taking my first class in geochemistry from a co-author of the paper where the Earth's age at 4.5 billion years was first published in Science magazine back in the 1950s.
Wow.
So yes, it is credible. It is not wild guessing.
Okay. So we might say that they have multiple ways of testing these methods. They have multiple lines of evidence. And when the evidence kind of all goes in the same direction, this is how we arrive at fairly certain numbers about the age of the Earth.
Exactly.
Okay.
Then supporting it in terms of general examples, I also, preparing to visit with you today, I looked at one case of a igneous rock in western Greenland, and there are 5 different radioactive atom parent-daughter systems done with radiometric dating, and they all came out from 3.5 to 3.6 billion years old when that igneous rock formed from a lava to a solid.
Very good.
That's excellent support of tying them together.
So if we use the right methods and we use them properly, we can get multiple lines of evidence that all go in the same direction.
Said just perfectly, Krista. Thank you very much.
Very good. And I want to encourage all of you to check out Ken's book on the Grand Canyon that we sell here at the ministry. There's a great chapter in that book of how to determine the age of rocks.
That's right.
Question.
It's called, How Old is This Rock?
Very good. And so if people want more information about that, we want to encourage them to check out your book on the Grand Canyon and get connected with Ken on his website, Solid Rock Lectures. Very valuable work that you are doing there, Ken. We thank you for your service to the church.
And I so appreciate the opportunity to partner with Reasons to Believe this week.
Very good.
So let's get really practical. What are the questions that we need to learn to ask? Here are the 2 central questions. Columbo question number 1 is the question, or some version of this, what do you mean by that? What do you mean by that? Notice, this is simply a clarification question. The purpose of this question is just to gather more information, right? If someone identifies themselves as an atheist or a Muslim or whatever label they give themselves, don't simply assume you know what that means because you know what atheism teaches. Right? Find out what that individual person believes by asking this question, what do you mean by that? And of course, you don't have to use those exact words. You're just trying to clarify, okay, when you say this, how do you define that? What do you mean by that? Right? So let's say, for example, you're talking to your atheist friend, right? You're talking to your atheist friend who looks like this with their atheist t-shirt. And they make the claim that there is no God. Now, some of us, we hear that and we go, you got the Kalam cosmological argument right here, buddy. And we're ready to bust out our arguments for God's existence. But the first thing we ought to do is not make statements, start with questions. Start with the question, what do you mean by that? What do you mean by God? Have them define God. I've talked to a number of young college atheists on college campuses who will say things like, well, they'll use the term sky God. There's no old man in a white robe with a long white beard holding a staff sitting in some throne in heaven. I don't believe in God. So what have I done? All I've done is clarified. This is their view of God. And you know what I say to that person who defines God that way? I say, "Oh, this is great, because I don't believe in that God either. That actually doesn't sound like God to me. That sounds like Gandalf, right?" I'm not going to spend my time defending the existence of Gandalf. And so what that does is from the get-go, it helps to clarify, get some information, help us get to a place where, okay, we're talking about the same thing. And oftentimes when you do that, you ask the questions, you really get to know their view, you clarify. And when you say like, well, I don't believe in that God either, then often that invites questions from them. Right? Well, what God do you believe in then? Well, I'm glad you asked, right? And then we can engage in that conversation.
And if you'd like to hear more from Brett Kunkle, visit maventruth.com. Now it's time for Culture Talk. This is the segment where we talk about the intersection of faith and pop culture and how culturally relevant topics can be used to start conversations about your faith. Jay Sherer, thank you so much for joining us. Welcome back.
Yeah, it's good to be back.
Yeah, so a quick bit about you. You're the founder of Reclamation Society and also the co-host of Story Geeks podcast.
That's right. I wore my logo wear today.
You did. I love it. It's awesome.
Yeah.
So we're going to talk, kind of picking up where we did last week, where we left off last week. So last week, Krista and I talked about why geek culture matters, why we're even having this conversation.
Sure.
And so hopefully if people haven't seen that clip, they'll go back and watch it. And now we're going to talk about like how we can authentically engage in geek culture. But first, let's look at kind of a common criticism that we might receive. It's that for Christians, people might be concerned that we're even attaching our faith to things of this world. So how would you respond to those types of concerns?
I think it's a really valid concern, first and foremost. I think there was a methodology of evangelism called DBS, and I can't remember what it stood for, but essentially it was taking biblical stories and walking people through them and asking, what does it reveal about God? What does it reveal about human nature? What does it reveal about the world that we live in at large? And it worked really, really well internationally, but it didn't work as well in the States. And so one of the things that we try to do on the Story Geeks is we try and say, I realize that I can't always take Christianity, at least in my marketplace with geeks, and just throw it in your face and have you respond to it. But what I can do is I can ask those same questions about the stories that culture is telling. Today's world, it's all geek stories. So what are we dealing with? We're dealing with geek things. And so what I like to do is I like to say, let's ask those same questions. What does this story reveal to us about spirituality? And where is that good or where is that bad? How does that resonate with you? And you can have those conversations with anybody and then work in your perspectives on faith and spirituality and Jesus Christ into those conversations. It's a really nice entree into a conversation that's very deep. Otherwise, it's really hard to have those conversations, especially in this fast go world, to really slow down and have those conversations. But I think a lot of geek stories allow us to do that if we're willing.
Right. And I think what you're saying is a lot like what we're told through Paul and what he tells us about becoming all things to all people. And it's really for God's glory and to bring those blessings, the truth of Scripture to different audiences. So that's really, I think, my motivation, and I think yours as well, that's why we are sharing and speaking that geek language. It's not because we're just so enamored with the world.
Right.
But again, those criticisms come up, and one of them is specifically that we water down the gospel. So how would you look at that question?
Yeah, I think that there's always a danger of watering down the gospel. But at the same time, the gospel is good news. I think a lot of times, especially in geek culture, if I were to go and show them a televangelist video, most televangelists, I'm making a generalization here, they're going to instantly reject that outright. And honestly, if you take a look at that from their perspective, you're probably going to reject that on their behalf outright as well. Because there's nothing that feels authentic about that. As you talk about Paul is ingraining himself in a culture, not so that he can kind of beat the culture over the head with his perspective, but that he can come to terms with how that culture deals with stories, deals with messages, and then address it from that perspective so that there's relationship there and so that he is authentic. Because one of the things I would not advise, if you're not a geek, don't try and have conversations with people about geek stuff and then like use that as a bait and switch to talk about Christianity. Live authentically out of yourself being a geek or whatever other marketplace that you're in. Live authentically out of that, and then have deep conversations with people in a way that they understand, because they're like you. You're like-minded in a way.
Right. And I think you make a point about, like, if you're not a geek, to not have those conversations. But I would kind of counter that and say, you know what, but we can at least ask questions. Because there are people who aren't scientists, but they're asking scientists, you know, what are some questions that you have about, you know, how did we get here? What is our purpose? And so you can ask questions. So for the non-geeks, like, don't be discouraged. You can still step into conversations. You might not know the history of, you know, every Marvel character. But, you know, you can still have conversations at least and ask questions.
Not only that, but what you can do is listen.
Right.
So I think one of the biggest things is the televangelist that I'm criticizing is not listening. They're speaking. In a culture that doesn't listen much anymore, you can invite someone into a deep conversation and you can know nothing about the subject matter. But that is just a place for you to be able to listen to their perspective, listen to what's going on in their life, listen to why they're resonating with some of the things that they're seeing in some of their favorite stories, and then just ask them why. Why do you resonate with that? What makes you resonate with that? What makes you feel love? What makes you feel peace? What makes you feel joy? What makes you feel hope? Guess what? Those are all things that we celebrate at Advent with the advent of Jesus Christ coming into the world. So we get a chance to talk about those things if we go deep with them. But I think it's really important, if you're not a geek especially, to listen first and see where they're coming from and not assume that you understand.
Right. Those are excellent points. And I know if people want to hear more about just your journey, they can check out reclamationsociety.org.
That's right.
And they can also find the Story Geeks podcast there.
Yeah, or you can go to thestorygeeks.com and get directly to all the podcast stuff.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for joining us, Jay. If you want to hear more from Jay, check out thestorygeeks.com. Now we're going to head over to Give and Take. Jeff is going to be talking with Fuzz Rana and Ken Samples about an important question. Did Neanderthals paint cave art? Let's check it out.
Hello and welcome again to Give and Take. I'm Jeff Zwerink, and this is the segment where we discuss those challenging and intriguing scientific issues to help you be more confident in the truth of Christianity. Today I'm joined by Ken Samples and Fuzz Rana, and we're going to ask the question, were Neanderthals artists like us? Ken, Fuzz, good to have you here again today.
Jeff? Hi, Jeff.
So, you know, we see cave paintings and stuff like that kind of scattered throughout the world, but kind of particularly in Europe. And I know that there's this idea out there that Neanderthals are just kind of almost humans, not quite, but they're close. And now there's kind of seems to be some evidence that Neanderthals actually painted some of these art. So I want to just kind of explore first off, what would be the implications of finding Neanderthals actually are artists like us?
You know, the way I think about it, Jeff, is from a Christian point of view, from the standpoint of the image of God, human beings are not merely different in degree from the animals, but they're a distinct difference in kind. I would expect that kind to reflect things like art, symbolic thought, religion, spirituality.
So these are going to be the things that are unique to humanity that if we see somewhere else, that's problematic from a scriptural standpoint.
I think if Neanderthals were capable of some of those things, it would raise question as to humanity's difference in kind. Yeah.
So if we see Neanderthals, or doing art, if you will, what sorts of capabilities does that mean they have that would impinge on that idea of the image of God?
Well, I mean, anthropologists would argue that what makes artistic expression possible is a property called symbolism, which is the ability to represent the world symbolically, and not only the world, but even abstract ideas symbolically. So when we speak or when we write language, that's essentially a manifestation of symbolism, but so is music and so is artistic expression. And what goes along with symbolism usually is what anthropologists call open-ended generative capacity, which is a mouthful, but it basically means we can embed one idea within another idea. And in doing that, we can create infinite alternative possibilities, which allows us to anticipate the future, dissect and reflect upon the past. And so when you look at art, which is an expression of symbolism, it also includes this manipulation of symbols to communicate an idea or a larger message.
So this makes it different than just communicating. So obviously animals communicate with one another, but it really is more the idea that we're communicating in ways that are not concrete, if you will, that have ideas embedded in ideas, or the idea that I can do something or choose not to do it not because there's some rational or material reason driving me, but because I choose to follow God, or these immaterial things. So this in that context, then, if we were to find Neanderthals actually composing music or drawing art, that would be very problematic then.
I would think so, yes.
I think it would lend support for degree and less support for kind, yeah.
So I want to go and explore. You've written a blog post fairly recently about some cave art, particularly in Europe, I believe it is, that, this is a place where Neanderthals and humanity overlapped for a while, where there seems to be some evidence that the Neanderthals might have painted it. What kind of briefly describe, what is that evidence?
Yeah, well, traditionally people have ascribed cave art to human beings uniquely. And human beings made their way into Europe somewhere between 40 and 45,000 years ago. And this is where people have traditionally dated the cave art. Neanderthals were in Europe already before human beings made their way into Europe. About 200,000 years ago, we have Neanderthals in Europe. And so if you date the cave art and it's older than when humans made their way into Europe, you would have to ascribe that art to Neanderthals. Now, it's very difficult to date cave art. But recently a technique was developed where people look at calcite formations on top of the art that are produced when water runs down the walls of caves. It'll deposit calcite as a thin, clear film, but in that calcite is a little bit of uranium and thorium, and you can use uranium-thorium dating to determine the age of the calcite, which tells you a minimum age for the art.
So does it have something that tells you behind and in front, or does it tell you that this stuff is at least this old, so the art has to be older than that?
It's both scenarios. In some instances, you may have the art produced on top of calcite, so then you could get minimum and maximum ages. And so these researchers have applied this technique now quite extensively in cave systems, mostly in Spain. And for the most part, the art dates under 40,000 years in age. There are a handful of samples that date at older than 60,000 years in age, and on this basis they're arguing, well, this must have been the product of Neanderthal activity, not human activity. So
do we throw our hands up and say, oh, Neanderthals have done this? I assume you have some skepticism of that.
Well, the assumption is that this technique is working well as a dating technique. And the problem is that it's what's called an open system by geologists. In order to do radiometric dating, once that structure forms, the calcite forms, you can't have uranium and thorium moving in and out of the system.
Right.
But the problem is that once that calcite film forms, more water will flow over it, and that water that flows over it will leach out uranium preferentially.
And so if it leaches out the uranium, there's less uranium in there, will make it look older than it actually was.
And so the fact that you only see a few samples that actually date older than 40,000 years in age, and in fact there's even one particular piece of art on the cave where different areas of the art actually date at different ages, which is to me an indication that the technique is probably not a reliable technique.
So in that scenario, we've got something that pushes back and makes it close to the time of humanity, maybe pushing it before. Seems to me you could kind of flip that around and say, what we see here is that as soon as humanity arrived, we see an abundance of art. That's a sign that humans are exceptional, because you don't see anything for the bulk of all of Neanderthals, and questionably even at the end.
That's exactly right. To me, I think that's the best interpretation, is humans had that capability to make art, that we brought it with us when we went into Europe, and it's now expressed in these cave paintings. And we actually now are discovering cave art in Asia that dates at older than 40,000 years in age, just about 45,000 years in age, that looked like it was the work of the first humans, which meant humans before they began to migrate must have had that capability. We're finding rock art in Africa that dates over 70,000 years in age, that's of the same nature as the cave art. So when we put it all together, it really looks like this is a capability that humans uniquely had before we began to migrate.
You know, there are some discoveries that you kind of look and you say, maybe the Bible doesn't have it right. But when you really dig in, especially when you're looking at cave art, the evidence really does point to humanity has that capability. From the earliest that humanity was around, we've had that capability. And everywhere we've spread across the globe, we've brought that capacity for symbolic thought, abstract art, that really is a reflection that we uniquely are made in God's image. And that, again, provides us confidence that the Bible gives an accurate picture of who we are and how we relate to God.
A couple weeks ago, we had Ken who was telling us about some exciting things happening at RTB, and one of the things he brought up was a Speakers Bureau. So how are you involved with it?
Yeah, so I'm actually overseeing the Speakers Bureau. It was an idea that RTB had probably 3 years ago.
Okay.
And so I was passionate about this, about finding new speakers for our team.
Okay.
And so they kind of handed this one off to me. But basically what it is that we don't have enough scholars to go everywhere we're invited to speak. So we're looking for speakers that can represent us, but be closer to where the requests are coming from.
Okay.
So we have a team of speakers there are people who have been connected with RTB, and they're going out and officially representing us and just really helping RTB get connected with more churches around North America.
Okay, tell me more about these speakers. Like, who are they?
Yeah, so all of our speakers are people that have some type of relationship with RTB. So people who are part of a chapter, maybe they've gone through the RI courses and they're in the apologetics community.
Okay.
Some of them are visiting scholars, but they're all people that know RTB, that understand our material.
Okay.
And basically we vet them, so they're every presentation that they're going to give for a church audience has to be approved by us first. So that way churches know that everything they're saying is reliable, that the scientific content is right,
Okay.
and even that they can break it down to a lay level.
Oh, that's awesome. I need lay level.
So do I.
All right. So if I want to get one of these speakers, how do I go about getting you at my event?
Yes, so you can go to our website and we have a request form that you can fill out for that.
Okay.
So if you go to reasons.org/speakers, that takes you to the main speakers page.
All right.
And in there, there's going to be a link for the submit a request form. And from there, you can fill that out. And all of our scholars are listed on there, along with all of our Speakers Bureau people. So you can go ahead and click on Speakers Bureau and choose the person that's close to your area.
Oh, that's awesome. Well, thank you so much, Bryan
Rohrenbacher.
All right. Well, I hope you'll check out our Speakers Bureau. And if you want some more information, just go to reasons.org/speakers. See you next time.
And we are done for this week.
Thanks so much for joining us. We hope that as you've been watching, you'll just be encouraged to share your faith and to do so with confidence and compassion.
And if you want to support resources like this show, please visit reasons.org/2819.
And don't forget to check us out. We're at 2819 Show on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
Send lots of likes. See you all next week.